There's something I've been seeing everywhere lately. People are searching for guidance like they're starving for it. They want someone to tell them who they are, what their purpose is, what their next step should be, what their fear means, what their relationship means, what their synchronicity means. And the moment you speak about inner work or spirituality, they ask, what are your credentials? What books have you read? Who trained you? And while all of this can matter, none of this defines wisdom. Because the truth is, every single one of us carries an inner guide. We just stopped listening. We live in a time where people trust everyone except themselves. They trust experts, they trust influencers, they trust gurus, they trust channel beings, they even trust the algorithm and strangers on the internet. But their inner voice and their intuition and their own psychological intelligence, that's the one voice they doubt. And it's not their fault. From childhood, we were taught that someone else knows better than us. And this is where it starts to matter more than people realize. The teacher knows, the parent knows, the priest knows, the doctor knows, the therapist knows, the spiritual teacher knows. We're taught to override our instincts, to silence our intuition, and to distrust our perception, to defer to authority. So when life becomes confusing, when we feel lost or afraid or uncertain, we instinctively look outward. We look for someone who seems more enlightened, more educated, more spiritually advanced, with more credentials. But here is the paradox. The more we search for answers outside ourselves, the further we drift from the one place where clarity actually lives, which is not in the book, not in a degree, and not in a spiritual teacher, but in the quiet intelligence that arises from your own psyche. Let me say something that might challenge people. Credentials don't guarantee wisdom. Degrees don't guarantee depth. Reading 1,000 books doesn't guarantee understanding. You can study psychology for 10 years and still not know yourself. You can memorize every spiritual text and still not be aware, and still be disconnected from your own intuition. Wisdom is not a certificate. Wisdom is not a resume. Wisdom is the ability to see clearly, to see patterns, to see your projections, your fears, your desires, your shadow, and your truth. And that clarity doesn't come from the outside, it comes from within. Some of the wisest people never read a single spiritual book. They learned from life, from pain, from observation, from silence, and from listening to themselves. And some of the most educated people that I have ever met are completely disconnected from their own inner world. Knowledge is information. Wisdom is integration. And integration doesn't require credentials. It requires honesty. There is a psychological reason people cling to guides. And it's not because they're weak, but it's because they're human. When you're overwhelmed, it feels safer to hand your power to someone else. When you're uncertain, it feels easier to let someone else decide. When you're afraid of making the wrong choice, you look for someone who seems more certain. But here is the deeper truth. Most people don't actually want answers. They want relief from responsibility. And this is the part that most people don't like to hear. If someone else tells you what to do, then you don't have to face the discomfort of listening to your own inner world. You don't have to confront your own contradictions. You don't have to sit with your own confusion. You don't have to risk being wrong. So we elevate guides, gurus, teachers, and higher beings into positions of authority because it feels safer than trusting ourselves. But safety is not the same as sovereignty. And here's the part that most people don't want to hear. If you always need a guide, you will never become one. You never develop the muscles of discernment. You never learn to hear your own intuition. You never learn to interpret your own psyche. And you never learn to trust your own perception. You stay spiritually independent instead of psychologically sovereign. Every person has an inner guide, not a voice of fantasy, not a voice of delusion, a voice of deep psychological intelligence. And it speaks through your intuition, your dreams, your body, your emotional reactions, synchronicities, your discomfort, your desires, and your resistance. But most people never hear it because they have been trained to override it. They have been taught to silence their own inner voice, to obey the external one. Reclaiming your inner guide is not about rejecting teachers or knowledge. It's about remembering that no one can know your path better than you. No one can interpret your psyche better than you. No one can walk your journey for you. A guide can point, a book can illuminate, a teacher can inspire, but only you can see from the inside. And here's the truth. Your inner guide is not loud, it's not dramatic, and it doesn't shout. It whispers, it nudges, and it pulls. It expands and contracts, and it signals. But you have to be willing to listen. And listening requires stillness. It requires honesty. It requires courage, because your inner guide will tell you the truth long before you're ready to hear it. There's nothing wrong with seeking guidance. We all need mirrors. We all need perspectives. We all need teachers at different stages of life. But guidance becomes dangerous when it becomes a dependency. This is where the line gets crossed. When you stop thinking for yourself, when you stop questioning, and when you stop listening inward, when you believe someone else has the authority to define your truth. A real guide doesn't want followers. A real guide wants you to outgrow them. A real guide doesn't want to give you answers. They help you hear your own. A real guide doesn't create dependency. They create sovereignty. And the moment a guide tells you that you cannot trust yourself, that you need them and that they know better than you, that's not a guide. That's an authority figure disguised as a spiritual teacher. Becoming your own guide requires courage, because trusting yourself means you can no longer blame anyone else. You can't blame the guru. You can't blame the psychic. You can't blame the astrologer. You can't blame the channeled entity. And you can't blame the expert. You have to take responsibility for your own choices, your patterns, your desires, your mistakes, your growth. And responsibility is uncomfortable, but it's also liberating, because once you trust yourself, you stop living in fear of being wrong. You stop living in fear of disappointing others. You stop living in fear of choosing incorrectly. You stop living in fear of uncertainty, and you realize that your inner guide has been speaking to you your entire life. You just weren't taught to hear it. So here's what I want to leave you with. Stop waiting for someone to give you permission to trust your own mind. Stop believing that wisdom only counts if it comes from a book or a degree. Stop assuming that someone else knows your path better than you do. You have an inner compass. You have an inner teacher. You have an inner source of clarity that no one else can access. And the moment you start listening to it, really listening, your life stops feeling like a search and starts feeling like a conversation. Not with the universe and not with a guide, but with yourself. Because the truth is, you are the guide you have been looking for.